My friend Jake kept spreading lies about me to steal my girlfriend and ruin my reputation for 8 months. I decided to teach him a lesson by letting him destroy himself, while I collected evidence and waited for the perfect moment to expose everything. This is how patience became the coldest revenge. Jake Morrison was the kind of guy who could convince you that black was white and make you thank him for opening your eyes. Tall, athletic, with an easy smile that made everyone trust him instantly. We had been best friends since freshman year of college, bonding over late-night gaming sessions and our shared hatred of our statistics professor. But Jake had this thing about him that I should have noticed earlier. He could not stand not being the center of attention, especially when it came to girls. Whenever I started dating someone, Jake would suddenly become their best friend too. Not in a supportive way, but in a possessive way where he needed to be involved in everything. If you have made it this far, kindly comment where you are watching this video from. When I started dating Sophia Chen during our sophomore year, Jake was immediately interested in our relationship. Sophia was incredible, smart, funny, with dark eyes that could see right through your bullshit. She was studying to be a therapist, which should have made her better at reading people, but Jake was just that good at manipulation. The first red flag was how quickly Jake inserted himself into our relationship. Within 2 weeks, he was texting Sophia directly, sending funny memes, asking about her classes. When I mentioned it seemed weird, he laughed and said he was just being friendly because she was important to me. Dude, she is going to be around a lot, Jake said, while we were playing Call of Duty in his dorm room. I want to make sure she likes me. It is better for everyone if we all get along, right? I wanted my best friend and my girlfriend to get along. I did not realize Jake was already studying Sophia, learning her insecurities, her communication style, what made her happy, and what made her doubt herself. Jake started showing up wherever Sophia and I were, study sessions at the library, casual dinners at the dining hall, even movie nights in my dorm room. He would bring snacks or offer to help with homework, always positioning himself as the helpful friend who just wanted everyone to have a good time. Your boyfriend is so lucky to have you, he would tell Sophia when I was within earshot. He better treat you right, or he will have to answer to me. He said it like a joke, but there was always an undertone that made it sound like he was already imagining himself as her protector. Sophia would laugh and say, Jake was sweet for caring. What she did not see was how Jake would watch her reactions, taking mental notes about what made her smile and what made her uncomfortable. The manipulation started small, subtle enough that I almost missed it. Jake would make casual comments about relationships in general, never targeting us specifically, but always planting little seeds of doubt. I just think trust is so important, he would say during group hangouts, like you should always be honest with your partner about where you are and who you are with. Secret keeping is how relationships die. He would share stories about friends whose relationships fell apart because of cheating, always framed as cautionary tales. My buddy Tyler thought his girlfriend was faithful for 2 years, Jake said while we watched Netflix. Turns out she was hooking up with guys from her work the whole time. He had no idea because he trusted her completely. Trust is good, but being aware is better. Sophia would nod, absorbing these stories. Jake was essentially giving her a masterclass in paranoia, while making it seem like friendly advice. The real genius of Jake's plan was how he positioned himself as the trustworthy friend who would never lie to her, while filling her head with stories about dishonesty. He was also establishing himself as the one person who would always tell her the truth. I will always be honest with you, Sophia, he told her one night when I went to grab pizza for our study group. Even if it is something you do not want to hear. That is what real friends do. When I got back with the food, Sophia seemed different. More distant, more observant. She kept looking at my phone when it buzzed, asking who was texting me. I could see the doubt in her eyes. Jake had planted the first seeds, and they were already starting to grow. Over the next few weeks, he ramped up his concerned friend routine. He pulled Sophia aside for private conversations about honesty in relationships. He shared more stories about friends who discovered their partners were lying, about small things that eventually became big problems. The thing about cheaters, Jake told Sophia during one of their coffee meetings that I only found out about later, is that they are really good at making you feel crazy for being suspicious. They will deny everything and make you think you are being paranoid, even when your gut is telling you something is wrong. Meanwhile, Jake encouraged me to be more independent and social. He suggested we go to parties without Sophia, saying she seemed stressed with school. He introduced me to girls and later mentioned to Sophia how much attention I was getting. "Your boyfriend is pretty popular with the ladies," he said casually. "Good thing he is so loyal to you." Comments like that sounded reassuring while creating anxiety. Jake was telling Sophia that other girls wanted me, while implying my loyalty was the only thing keeping me faithful. 3 months in, Sophia started questioning everything. She asked detailed questions about where I had been and who I had talked to. When I gave honest answers, she seemed unsatisfied, as if waiting for me to slip up. "Jake mentioned you were talking to that girl Madison at the library yesterday," she said one evening. "What were you talking about?" I had helped Madison with a calculus problem for maybe 5 minutes, but Jake had turned it into something worth reporting. Sophia nodded but still seemed troubled. It was then I realized Jake was feeding her information about my daily activities, framing innocent interactions as suspicious. He was spying on me and reporting back with his twisted interpretation. The final piece of Jake's setup was establishing himself as Sophia's primary emotional support. Whenever she seemed upset about our relationship, Jake was there with advice. "You deserve someone who makes you feel secure," he told her during their increasingly frequent coffee meetings. "You should not have to worry about whether your boyfriend is being honest with you." By the end of our first semester, Jake had positioned himself as Sophia's closest confidant while destroying our trust. Neither Sophia nor I saw it coming. If you are enjoying the story, kindly subscribe to the channel to support. By the end of our first semester together, Jake had successfully positioned himself as Sophia's closest confidant, while simultaneously making her doubt my faithfulness. That was the groundwork, but I had no idea how far he was willing to go. What happened next was not sudden. It was slow, deliberate, and devastating, like a single drop of water wearing down stone over time. At first, the changes were so subtle, I brushed them off. I told myself relationships evolve, people get stressed, friends sometimes cross lines without realizing it. But when I look back now, I see how carefully Jake was constructing a world where he was the hero and I was the untrustworthy villain. The thing about manipulation is that it rarely feels like manipulation in the moment. Jake never came at me directly. He never accused me of anything in front of Sophia. Instead, he built this parallel reality through half-truths, suggestions, and perfectly timed stories. And because he always wore that charming smile, the one that made everyone trust him, it was almost impossible to see the poison dripping beneath it. Sophia's behavior started changing. She would ask small questions about my day that seemed innocent at first, but had a sharpness behind them. "How long were you at the library today? Who did you sit with at lunch? Why didn't you answer your phone right away when I called?" At first, I laughed them off. I thought she was just being playful, maybe a little clingy because of the stress of finals. But then the questions became more pointed. I remember one night in particular. We were studying in her dorm room. She closed her notebook and looked at me with this serious expression I was not used to seeing on her face. "Jake said you were talking to Madison again today," she said. It took me a second to even remember what she meant. Madison had asked me about a calculus assignment, and I had spent maybe 5 minutes helping her understand the formula. Nothing more. But when Sophia repeated Jake's version, it sounded like I had spent the entire afternoon flirting with Madison. "I was literally explaining derivatives," I said. "That is it. 5 minutes, tops." Sophia nodded slowly, but the doubt in her eyes lingered. That was when it hit me. Jake was not just being a nosy friend. He was actively monitoring my daily life and reporting back to Sophia with his own twisted commentary. The genius of Jake's setup was that he never outright accused me of anything. He framed everything as concern. "I just thought you should know," he would tell Sophia. Or, "Maybe it's nothing, but it looked a little suspicious." By the time his words reached me through Sophia, they carried the weight of truth. After all, why would Jake, my best friend, lie? But Jake did more than just plant seeds of doubt. He also built himself up as the person Sophia could rely on when those doubts became too heavy. If she ever seemed upset, Jake was there. If we had an argument, Jake was the first person she confided in. And slowly, without me even realizing it, he became her emotional anchor. What made it worse was how natural he made it seem. He never forced himself into her space. He let her come to him. At least that was how it looked on the surface. In reality, he carefully engineered opportunities for her to lean on him. For example, there was a night when Sophia and I had a minor argument about how much time we were spending together. She said I was distracted, that I seemed distant. I tried to explain I was stressed about exams, but she was unconvinced. We left the conversation unresolved. The next morning, Jake just happened to text her. "Hey, you seemed upset last night. Want to grab coffee and talk?" I did not even know about that meeting until weeks later. But that was his move. He would swoop in right after we hit a rough patch, presenting himself as the understanding friend who could listen without judgment. Every time he did it, Sophia trusted him more and me less. The library became another one of his hunting grounds. Whenever Sophia and I made plans to study, Jake would show up, claiming he was just passing through. He would sit down, crack a joke, pull out his notes, and suddenly our study session became a trio. If I tried to object, I looked controlling. If I stayed quiet, I let him insert himself further. And Sophia, she never saw the pattern. To her, Jake was just being friendly. She thought it was sweet that my best friend cared so much about our relationship. She thought his constant presence was proof that he wanted the best for both of us. But to me, it started to feel like suffocation. There were times I wanted to pull Sophia aside and tell her everything, to scream that Jake was manipulating us, that he was trying to wedge himself between us. But every time I opened my mouth, I hesitated. What if she thought I was being paranoid? What if she thought I was jealous of their friendship? After all, Jake had already primed her with countless stories about partners who made their girlfriends feel crazy for being suspicious. That was the brilliance of his setup. He made it impossible for me to defend myself without proving his point. If I said he was manipulating us, Sophia would remember Jake's warnings about guys who gaslight their girlfriends into ignoring their instincts. If I tried to limit her time with him, I would look controlling. And if I said nothing, Jake had free rein to keep digging into our lives. I was trapped, and he knew it. One afternoon, I got a glimpse of how deep his manipulation had gone. Sophia and I were walking back from class when she casually asked, "Do you think couples should share their phone passwords?" It seemed like a random question at the time, but when I asked why she brought it up, she shrugged and said Jake thought it was a sign of trust. My stomach sank. Jake was now dictating what counted as trust in our relationship. He was setting the standards, and Sophia was listening. I tried to explain that I valued privacy, that trust meant respecting each other's space. Sophia nodded, but I could see the disappointment flicker in her expression. Later that night, I found out she had texted Jake about our conversation, and his reply, "I get it. Not everyone is comfortable being fully transparent, but if you ever feel uneasy, that might be your gut telling you something." That was his favorite line. Trust your gut. He used it constantly. He knew that if he could make Sophia doubt me even slightly, her gut would do the rest of the work. The longer this went on, the more isolated I felt. Jake had inserted himself into every corner of my relationship. He knew when we argued. He knew what we argued about. He knew when Sophia felt insecure, and he always presented himself as the solution. What broke me was how Sophia began comparing us without realizing it. She would say things like, "Jake thinks communication is the most important part of a relationship," or, "Jake said his parents always made time for each other no matter how busy they were." It was like Jake was rewriting the rule book of our relationship, and I was constantly coming up short. The worst part was that Sophia genuinely believed Jake was on my side. She thought he was trying to help us stay strong. She never saw how he was slowly tearing us apart from the inside. I started noticing the little looks Jake would give me when Sophia was not watching. Smug glances, subtle smirks, like he was daring me to call him out. He knew I could not, without looking insecure. He had built a perfect trap, and he was enjoying every second of watching me squirm inside it. It was not just about Sophia. It was about control. Jake thrived on being the puppet master. He loved knowing he could pull strings and watch people dance without ever realizing who was pulling them. And in this case, he had orchestrated the perfect setup. By the time winter break came around, Sophia and I were still together, but the cracks in our relationship were obvious. We argued more often. She trusted Jake's perspective more than mine, and I had begun to realize that if I wanted to save us, I could not just confront Sophia. I had to find a way to expose Jake for who he really was. But the problem with snakes is that they do not bite until they know the time is right. And Jake was patient. He was willing to wait as long as it took to make his move. And that was when I decided I would be just as patient. Because if Jake wanted to play a long game, he was about to find out I could play one too. And that was when I decided I would be just as patient. Because if Jake wanted to play a long game, he was about to find out I could play one too. From that night forward, my mind shifted into a state of quiet calculation. I stopped reacting to him in the moment. stopped giving him the satisfaction of seeing me rattled, and instead began to observe, to listen, and to prepare. It was almost like flipping a switch, where before I had been hurt and blindsided, now I was composed, deliberate, and steady. I realized that people like Jake thrive on immediate chaos, on quick reactions, on the instant fallout of their lies. If you deny them that satisfaction, if you let their stories sit and rot in the dark, while you quietly weave your own net around them, they eventually strangle themselves in their own web. I did not know how long it would take, but I was no longer in a rush. I was watching him now the way a hunter watches prey, letting him think he was free, while I was mapping out every movement, every weakness. The first step was information. Lies always leave a trail. He was clever, yes, but clever people often get overconfident. They repeat themselves, they embellish, they forget who they said what to, and Jake was no different. Once I began listening closely, I noticed how his stories shifted depending on who he was with. Around one group, I was supposedly controlling, around another, I was painted as distant, and around my girlfriend, he mixed both narratives to make me look unstable, but the details never quite lined up. Sometimes he said I ignored her calls, other times that I would not let her talk to anyone else. Sometimes he said I had a temper, other times that I was cold and detached. For someone not paying close attention, it sounded convincing. But I was paying very close attention now. I started quietly checking things. If he told her I had ignored her texts one evening, I would show her my phone with the timestamps, proving I had replied within minutes. If he claimed I was rude to someone, I would ask that person directly in front of her, and watch as they looked confused because no such thing had happened. At first, she thought it was coincidence, but over time, the cracks in his stories began to widen. I could see the doubt flickering in her eyes, small at first, but growing every time reality did not quite match the picture he had painted. I never pushed it too hard. I never accused him outright in front of her. I simply allowed the inconsistencies to expose themselves, a drip at a time, like water slowly eroding stone. At the same time, I became very careful about my own behavior. I made sure I was calm, respectful, and consistent. If he wanted to portray me as volatile, I would be the picture of patience. If he wanted me to look controlling, I would be open and trusting. Every time he tried to bait me into a reaction, I smiled, shrugged, and let it slide. It drove him mad. I could see it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his voice sharpened when I refused to give him the drama he was trying to create. He wanted me to explode, to snap, to give him proof of the monster he had invented. But I gave him nothing. That was the real beginning of his unraveling. Of course, patience is not just about waiting. It is about preparation. While I was careful with my actions, I was also quietly gathering proof, screenshots of conversations, little recordings of him when he got too confident and spoke freely, even messages he sent to mutual friends where he slipped up and contradicted himself. I never flaunted any of it. I kept it all tucked away, building a silent arsenal that he did not know existed. Every time he lied, I made a note of it. Every time he twisted something, I wrote down the real version. It was meticulous work, and it took weeks, then months, but I knew the time would come when all of it would be needed. But as much as I prepared, I was also human, and there were moments where it was exhausting. Watching someone you once called a friend try so hard to dismantle your life is a special kind of pain. I would lie awake at night, wondering what his end goal even was. Did he really want her for himself? Did he just want to see me suffer? Or was it something deeper, something broken inside of him that made him thrive on destruction? Sometimes I almost pitied him, because only a deeply insecure person could spend so much energy tearing others down. But then I would remember the hurt in her eyes when she doubted me, the way friends began to look at me differently, and my pity would harden back into resolve. He had chosen this path, and he would have to walk it to the end. The breaking point did not come suddenly. It built, slow and steady, like pressure behind a dam. Each lie added weight, each manipulation added strain. And I knew that when it finally gave way, it would not be a small trickle. It would be a flood that swept everything away. I began to see signs of it before anyone else did. His stories started to overlap too much. He would forget what he had told one person and contradict himself in front of another. He began to get careless, throwing out accusations that were too dramatic to be believable. At one point, he even claimed I had tried to physically threaten him, a story so absurd that even those closest to him raised their eyebrows. He laughed it off and said he was joking when pressed, but I could see the cracks widening. The real shift, though, happened with her. My girlfriend had been slowly pulling away, unsure who to believe, caught in the middle of his poison. I had felt the distance growing, the coldness in her voice, the hesitation in her smile. But the more I stayed calm, the more I let reality speak for itself, the more she began to see him for what he was. It was not sudden, it was a gradual awakening. She would ask small questions. Why did Jake say one thing but her own eyes saw another? Why did he always seem to bring up drama when things were going well between us? Why did his version of events never quite match up with what she experienced? I could see the gears turning in her mind. She never admitted it outright, but I knew she was starting to doubt him, and that was all I needed. Doubt is powerful. Doubt is the beginning of truth. Meanwhile, Jake grew bolder. He sensed her slipping, and it made him desperate. He pushed harder, told bigger lies, and tried to corner me in more obvious ways. Once, he confronted me in front of a group of friends, loudly accusing me of saying things I never said. He thought I would lose my temper. Instead, I looked him in the eye, smiled, and calmly asked him to repeat his story. He stumbled. The details wavered. And in that silence, as the group watched him falter, I knew he felt the ground beneath him start to crumble. It was small, but it was the beginning of the end. Still, I did not rush. Patience was my weapon, and I wielded it carefully. Every lie he told was another thread in the noose he was weaving for himself. I just had to let him keep going, and he did. He could not stop. That was his weakness. He was so consumed by the need to control the narrative, to be seen as the hero or the victim, that he could not see how tangled he had become. And I, watching silently, waiting, knew that all it would take was one final push for the entire facade to collapse. That push was coming. I could feel it. The way tension hung in the air whenever we were all in the same room. The way eyes lingered on him longer now, questioning instead of believing. The way she had started to pull away from him, no longer eager to hear his stories, no longer blindly trusting his words. The balance was shifting, and he felt it too. I could see the panic behind his confidence, the cracks behind his smile. He was losing control, and he knew it. And so, I waited. Because the breaking point was near. It was not something I had to force. It was something he was walking toward on his own. Every lie another step closer to the edge. All I had to do was stay steady, stay calm, and be ready when the moment came. And deep down, I knew that when it did, it would not just expose him, it would destroy him. And that was the thought that carried me through those final days of patience. The knowledge that soon, very soon, the mask would fall, and everyone would finally see him for who he truly was. Because the breaking point was no longer a matter of if. It was only a matter of when. When the weeks turned into months, and the quiet war between Jake and me became the very rhythm of my life, I found myself preparing for the inevitable endgame. He had been bold enough to think he could unravel me by spreading lies, whispering poison into the ears of Sophia, and weaving his image of me as someone untrustworthy and small. And yet, he underestimated something that even I had not truly realized until then. I could wait. I could smile and nod and play the part of the man who had been beaten down, all while I carved the ground out from beneath his feet. If patience was the currency of this fight, I had more stored up than he could ever spend. I had learned how his words slipped through the cracks of people's minds, filling the spaces with suspicion. I had learned how Sophia had begun to measure my worth against his version of me, instead of the man she had once known. But I also knew that lies are fragile. They are only as strong as the silence that surrounds them. Eventually the truth, when revealed at the right time, does not just correct the lie, it obliterates it. And so I began to plan not just a counterattack but a collapse. I started with his confidence. I let him believe he was winning. When he looked at Sophia, I let him feel her growing distance from me as his triumph. I saw the way his eyes lit up when she listened to him more than me, the way he puffed his chest when he thought his words had shifted her heart. I gave him space to think the battle was already over, to think I had been broken down into a shadow. He believed it because that was who he was. Jake had never learned to distinguish between silence and surrender. But behind that silence I was gathering threads. I was watching carefully, collecting every small inconsistency in his stories, every exaggeration that slipped from his lips, every contradiction between what he told Sophia and what he told our other friends. I knew Jake's weakness was not just his jealousy, but his inability to stop himself from embellishing. Lies for him were not just weapons. They were habits, and habits, once noticed, become cages. So, I waited. I smiled at gatherings, even when I saw him lean close to Sophia to whisper something that made her glance at me with doubt. I laughed when he joked at my expense, though each one was designed to chip away at my image. I stayed calm when he casually told others how I had failed at this or that, things I knew he twisted from thin air. Because in those moments, I was not playing defense. I was laying the foundation for the coldest lesson of his life. The key came when Sophia herself began to feel the weight of his contradictions. She did not show it at first, but I saw it in the way her brow furrowed when Jake over-explained a story about something I had supposedly done. I noticed the way her eyes flickered between him and me, when his tone was a little too rehearsed. Doubt, the very tool he had used against me, was beginning to turn on him. And doubt is the crack from which truth seeps through. But I did not rush it. I let it simmer. I let him keep digging, telling Sophia how I had lied to her, how I had betrayed small confidences, how I was not who she thought I was. Each lie was another stone he stacked on a tower that had no foundation. The higher he built, the more devastating the collapse would be. And collapse was exactly what I had in mind. The final act began with an invitation, a small gathering among friends, nothing unusual, something Jake could not resist attending, because he thrived in rooms where he could perform. I chose the setting carefully. A living room, casual, safe, full of people who had heard versions of his stories, but never all of them at once. I knew Jake could not help himself. I knew he would play his part. And I knew Sophia would be there, watching, listening, weighing every word. That evening, as people gathered and drinks flowed, Jake found his stage. He leaned back in his chair, his voice rising above the room as he recounted one of his favorite tales about me. This time it was about how I had supposedly tried to cheat on Sophia, how I had been caught in a lie, how he had been the one to protect her from me. The room chuckled at his dramatics, but I could see the unease flicker across Sophia's face. She had heard this story before, but Jake had changed a detail. Last time he said it had happened in the spring. Tonight he claimed it was during winter break. A small shift, but enough for her to notice. I let him finish. I let the laughter fade. And then, without raising my voice, I asked him a simple question. Jake, when exactly did that happen again? The room fell quiet. He blinked, caught off guard by my calm tone. Like I said, winter break. Funny, I said, still smiling. Because last time you told it, you said it was spring. Which one was it? The silence in the room was sharper than any blade. Jake stammered, tried to cover, claimed I was twisting his words. But the seed had been planted. People remembered. Sophia remembered. And suddenly the cracks in his tower were visible to everyone. I did not press further. I did not need to. That single moment was enough to tilt the balance. From then on, Sophia's eyes followed him differently. She noticed every pause, every hesitation, every contradiction. And the more she noticed, the more Jake tried to overcompensate, spinning bigger lies to patch the holes. But lies are not mortars. They are acid. The more he poured, the faster his walls dissolved. I remained patient. I remained quiet, because the most ruthless way to teach a lesson is not to strike loudly, but to let someone destroy themselves while you watch. And Jake, blinded by his own arrogance, was doing exactly that. Weeks later, Sophia came to me. She asked questions, gentle at first, then sharper. She recounted things Jake had said, and I answered with honesty, offering proof when I could, reminding her of shared memories that contradicted his tales. Piece by piece, she saw it. Piece by piece, she realized she had been led into a maze of deception. And when that realization hit, it was not anger she felt at me, it was betrayal she felt toward him. I watched as the distance grew between them. I watched as Jake's confidence began to crack, his jokes falling flat, his stories questioned instead of believed. The attention he had craved now turned against him, and he could not bear it. The final blow came not from me but from Sophia herself. One evening she confronted him in front of friends, asking him directly to explain the contradictions in his stories. He tried, of course. He laughed it off, tried to charm his way through, but charm without trust is nothing. And when the group saw his facade slip, when they saw the desperation in his eyes, the collapse was complete. Jake lost more than just Sophia that night. He lost the audience he had always craved. He lost the respect of friends who once humored his stories. He lost the image of himself he had so carefully constructed. And I, who had waited patiently, who had endured his lies and his whispers, stood untouched. The coldness of it all was that I never raised my voice, never fought him openly, never stooped to his level. I let him write his own downfall with his own hand. I let him believe he was in control until the moment he realized he had been walking into a trap of his own making. And by then, there was nothing left for him to do but watch it all crumble. Sophia came back to me, not instantly, not as if nothing had happened, but with the kind of sincerity that comes only after betrayal has been exposed. She apologized for doubting me, for letting Jake's words cloud her judgment. And though I accepted, I also knew something had changed forever. Trust, once cracked, can never return to its original shape, but I did not need it to. I had already won. The most ruthlessly cold lesson I ever taught someone was not delivered in anger or violence. It was delivered in silence, in patience, in letting a man's own lies become the rope with which he hung himself. Jake wanted to ruin me. Instead, he ruined himself. And as I watched him fade from our lives, alone and bitter, I understood something that would stay with me forever. The cruelest revenge is not to destroy someone, it is to let them destroy themselves while you stand by, smiling, untouched. And that is exactly what I did. Thanks for making it to the end of the story. Kindly subscribe and turn on the notification bell for more stories like this. Bye.